Welcome to the Transform DC Justice teach-in series. This is night 3 for us. We have been here every Tuesday talking about transforming DC justice. As you can see, our goals, we want to deepen our collective understanding. We want to build relationships across difference, and we want to identify priorities for DC Working Families Party and the greater community. So folks who are in the chat, some of y'all are DCWFP families, some folks are new, and we're just excited to learn about these recommendations and figure out how we want to prioritize this year and next year. Let's go to the next slide. So here are community agreements. I want to highlight that we're going to center the needs of people most directly impacted by the prison industrial complex and formerly incarcerated people. And so that is some of our agreement for the space. And also want to take this time for our co-facilitators. Please introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't already. We have a wonderful panel for you today. Awesome. Let's go to the next one.
Hey everyone, last week we got to talk about decarceration and started to talk about some different ways to make change. We're going to stick in the chat a few of the things that we talked about and that we heard back from you on our exit survey. And then tonight we're going to be going over the task force recommendations for local control, as well as looking at some defund NPD roadmap recommendations. Then we'll break out by advocacy type and talk a bit about strategy. So we'll start out by breaking into groups and talking about local control recommendations. Then we'll come back together, share what we've learned, do a bit of group teaching moment, and then we're going to move into those advocacy groups and talk about strategy. And don't forget at the end, exit survey. We'd love to hear back from you all.
Awesome. All right, so I'm going to talk about our local control. Thank you, Casey, for dropping in what we did last week. So we want to talk about local control and why it's important. Since DC is not a state, because DC gave up local control of several pieces of our criminal justice system to get out of debt to the federal government, like back in 1997. The federal government operates and controls many of the parts of the DC criminal legal system. So that means that much of DC's criminal legal system is controlled by the current president. So we know what kind of impacts that might have had over the last 4 years. Without local control over these federally controlled agencies and institutions that serve DC residents, it is difficult to make sure that these agencies and institutions are accountable to DC and that they monitor the quality of services they are providing, or for us to hold them accountable when things go wrong. So regaining local control gives us more power in shaping how these agencies serve DC residents, oversight over the quality of services that they're going to provide, and the ability to hold them accountable. And we'll go to the next one.
So the task force made 4 recommendations when it came to local control. They have to do with clemency, parole, halfway houses, and ending the use of the Bureau of Prisons. So we're going to go through them real quick, and then we're going to talk about them a bit more in breakout groups. Clemency is a way of granting relief from a criminal conviction or punishment, such as commutation or pardons. The task force recommended that DC's new clemency board begin accepting and processing applications and making recommendations to the President of the United States. Parole is the early release of someone who is incarcerated who agrees to abide by certain conditions of release. The task force recommended that DC establish a new local paroling authority no later than November 1st, 2022. We talked about halfway houses a little bit last week, but a halfway house is a facility that a person can enter at the end of their incarceration to help them transition back into the community. And the task force made a few recommendations here. They wanted Core DC to be allowed to open the new men's halfway house and negotiate memorandums of understanding or MOUs and community benefits agreements or CBAs with community-based organizations, ANCs, and other surrounding community members. And then finally, the task force's last local control recommendation is that we transfer people serving felony convictions for DC code offenses in BOP facilities back to DOC custody, so bring them back to the district. And then they named several groups that should be prioritized for transfer. And those are the task force's recommendations.
Right. One thing we want to note is that tonight we're going to cover the task force recommendations and a few recommendations from Working Families Party and Defund MPD Coalition. All of these represents thousands of people who believe in a world, Defund MPD Coalition represents thousands of people who believe in a world without jails or prisons. And at any point, we believe that we need to intervene and support releasing people from cages and transforming the root causes of harm, poverty, and oppression. And this is a space for us to gain more understanding about these recommendations from the task force and to hear your feedback to figure out what our priorities are. All right, let's get into our breakout sessions. So here we go. Let's go to the next slide. Before we open up, let's go to the next slide. So in this session, in our breakout session, you're gonna have 20 minutes and we're gonna learn about these key recommendations. We're gonna process as a group what's coming up for you, and you're gonna design your Jamboard. So that's how you're gonna take notes to present what you learned and what came up for you to the full group, okay? So you are going to be able to choose which group you go into. And so the sizes may not be, you may have some large groups, you may have some small groups. And I'm gonna wait to hear from our tech support. Are we ready? Okay, they're started. So everyone, you can look at the bottom and press breakout rooms. And if you press breakout rooms, you should see the different groups. You can click on those groups. You can click the number. So if I'm looking at clemency and I see the number 0, I'll put my mouse in front of it and I'll press join. And that will move me into the group that I want to be in. Our facilitators are on their ways to meet you there. I see Sarah, you're joining. Myra, you're joining. So our facilitators are on their way to meet you there, and we'll be back in about 20 minutes.
Like for example, a kitchen at the bottom of the, you know what I'm saying, and teaching culinary arts where you could receive a food handler's license, possibly. Probably like a studio in there. It was even said that, like, I forgot, I was listening, but I forgot but they said that it was a program already where they go out and like plant, like they started a garden and whatnot. So the end of the parties definitely express more like a communication from the community with the individuals, because individuals need to feel love coming back into the community. You know what I'm saying? Some individuals don't have loved ones at home. You know what I'm saying? And while they was incarcerated, they didn't have nobody reaching out to them. So to expect them to transition back into society, you know what I'm saying, it's not really rehabilitation. It's a transformation, because you have to really you had to program this individual to a whole nother self. He has to really change, you know what I'm saying? Or she has to change. So programs were definitely a top 3 as well. So I think that's it though. I'm good, right? Would anybody want to piggyback off? I think I'm good.
I think that was dope. Love. Let's go to our last group.
Awesome. We're going to have Tanya give our group summary.
All right, hi everyone. So we were in the ending use of the Bureau of Prisons group. So there are currently 2,950 people who are from Washington, D.C. incarcerated in facilities. They're supposed to be placed just 500 miles away, but some of them are thousands of miles away from D.C. So what we mostly talked about is how this presents challenges for family members that wish to visit them, but also as we think about the task force recommendations, specifically how to balance those with abolitionist concerns. You know, for example, abolitionists generally want to make lives better for people who are currently incarcerated. At the same time, most abolitionists would argue that we should not invest more money into the coercive apparatus. Current proposal is to build an additional annex at the DC jail. So we talked about how to balance those needs. I don't think we had a consensus, but I think it's an issue that could be discussed. And we also talked about addressing immediate needs. You know, we still have family members unable to afford to visit their loved ones because they're so far away. We have returning citizens coming home from very far away, navigating those things as well. So I think that covers it, but feel free to add on, anyone.
Okay, cool. So if anybody has any questions for either, like for any of the groups, you can go ahead and post them inside of the chat, or you can, if you want to go straight to the Jamboard and post a sticky note on there, we could also have it there as well. But we can go ahead and move on to the next slide.
Well, let's, I'm going to check with Bailey. Do we have time to do these questions?
We do have time. We can talk for about 10 minutes.
Okay, awesome. So how about we just give time for people to put in if they want to ask a question. You have about 10 minutes of this space, a question or a comment. If you're like, I'm not trying to talk, but I want to show support, if you go into the link of the Jamboard, you see these little stars here. You can like take a star and like put it where you're like, I'm really feeling that. So I'm like, I'm gonna put that star near that comment. So that's what you can do to show your support, even if you're like, I don't want to talk. And facilitators, we will like try and unmute people and give folks about 30 seconds or so for your question.
Hi, I would just like to just add just one statement to what Afeni stated regarding our discussion in clemency. One of the good things that came out of our discussion was that folks asked specific questions about who serves on the clemency board, what the criteria is for getting clemency granted. And so that was really, really a good part of the discussion, just being able to share with folks the reality of the clemency board coming into being what it should be.
Awesome. I can't look at the chat. So Afeni, do you see anyone asking any questions or wanting to speak?
We just got one from Gavin. Gavin asked, has the ACLU considered legal action against DC if the suggestions do not come to fruition, as was done with the stop and frisk thing. So I guess
so, just to name, none of our facilitators, I believe, are on with ACLU DC. So I think the recommendations, maybe the question to go deeper into this, these are recommendations. Are any of these law yet? Are any of these legislation that that anyone could sue the city based on, or are these just recommendations right now? To Bailey or any of the folks.
Clemency,
there you go.
The clemency board, that is law. So the Clemency Board Establishment Act of, I think, 2017. I see Linda nodding, so yes. I feel like I got the date right.
Yes, that's right.
2017 established the Clemency Board in DC.
Yeah, the challenge is, even though the board has been meeting for the last year or so, so they took a long time between when the statute was created, when they actually started meeting, and now that they are meeting, they have, in my opinion, been dragging their feet about getting the regulations drafted that actually make the application a reality. So someone put in chat, can a person apply for pardon or commutation? Not quite, because there is no application yet.
And there's also another question here. Do any groups want to address the question of jobs and employment for people exiting the system? I don't know if anybody else wants to take that. I have an opinion about it, but I don't have any solid facts, so.
I think we talked about it a little bit in the halfway house group, so I welcome anyone who's in that group to also speak up. But I think Tyrone talked about it a little bit, but we talked about one, how there's little to no programming at DC's current halfway house facilities, and increasing access to programming and job skills training and opportunities would be great. And then we also sort of talked a little bit outside of the box, like were DC to have total and complete control over this process, what would it look like? And we talked about making, having several small facilities throughout the district, and maybe each facility could have a sort of special program or job readiness, skill set. So maybe one place was focused on cooking, I think Tyrone mentioned, and that sort of a thing. And a person could opt to go there based on their interests and the skills they want to learn and the job they want to have. I also see Amanda's question about when the new halfway house is planning to open. So the new men's halfway house facility is slated to hopefully open in the fall. So fall 2021 is when it is scheduled to open, if all things go well.
And I'll just add on to the conversation about jobs for people coming home. We know that that is not just an issue for the government, that is an issue for our community and for people who are in a position to hire people. So I just wanted to bring that up. If you're interested in that issue, we talk about it a lot at the National Rancher Network for Returning Citizens.
Are we at time, Bailey? We're close to time.
We have time for 2 more questions, I think.
Awesome. Okay.
So the question in the chat is, is there any conversation about returning citizens coming back to DC and becoming homeless? So I guess that's more like a halfway house thing, right? Possibly.
Does anyone in our group want to
Sure,
say anything?
I can jump in. Housing insecurity, housing instability is the #1 issue for folks returning home from incarceration. All reentry experts in the city agree on this. There are a number of initiatives afoot to address and alleviate this. DC Council awarded $1.8 million last year to be awarded through the Office of Victim Services and Justice Grants. And 2 awards were made to University Legal Services, Prison, Jail and Prison Advocacy Project, as well as Catholic Charities to provide housing to folks returning home. There are also other CBOs that have initiatives specifically tailored toward returning citizens, housing them. The National Reentry Network for Returning Citizens in partnership with some, so others may eat. The Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee has not a task force, but a working group, if you will, which is concentrated on this issue. Also, there's a new group called Collective Impact that's specifically going to be geared toward identifying housing options for returning citizens. Everyone is aware that this is a major issue, and it's sort of a popcorn approach. There's not a one size fits all. And I think most people agree that there needs to be a housing first model, which is that you house people first and everything flows from there, whether it's substance misuse or abuse, whether it's mental health, whether it's medical conditions, whether it's being employed or unemployed. All of that has to be based on a foundation, and that foundation is housing. And when you're homeless, you can't think of anything else other than sustaining your life. So yeah, it's a major challenge for our city because there's housing instability across the board. That's the problem. Housing is exceedingly expensive in the District of Columbia for everyone.
If I could just add on just one statement, someone put in the chat the question about restrictions for sex offenders. And it made me think about, yes, housing is limited and it's very expensive to live in DC, but we also have to think about what creates homelessness for men and women who are returning from time in custody. And some of that is imposed by the agencies that are supposed to be providing services, right? And one of them is CSOS and supervision. Why is it that you cannot reside with another person who has a criminal record? And so that means that someone in the household has to go to the shelter and can't go back home. Like, those are the kind of restrictions that create homelessness that need to be removed as barriers. And yes, the sex offender restriction, creates additional barriers.
Awesome. Thank you. Is that our last question, y'all? All right. I can't look at the agenda, so I'm awesome. Afeni, if you want to take us to our next section.
All right. So I just need to slide real quick. So we're going to talk about like what didn't get recommended and why. So courts, U.S. Marshals, U.S. attorneys, public defenders.
Oh, I'm going to pause you, Afeni. Just wait for a second for the slides to come up.
Okay.
I want to make sure everyone knows what you're saying.
But yeah, so what didn't get recommended and why? So again, it's just really because those systems are way bigger, they cost more money, and the task force prioritize things that could realistically be returned to local control within 10 years without relying on statehood. So next slide. So how would statehood affect these recommendations? We really don't know. It would probably speed up the timeline for local control and paying for those bigger institutions. The mayor and advocates are only starting to seriously think about this and seriously consider it. As you know, they were talking about that DC statehood on the House floor yesterday as well. So let's cross our fingers. One thing we know is DC would not be on the hook to pay all of these local dollars because all states get federal funding for pieces of their criminal justice system. So yeah.
Awesome. So thank you, Afeni. We are going to get another chance to do some breakout rooms, and we'll actually have a couple more minutes this time. So I know last time felt rushed for my group. So hopefully this time will be a little more time to chat in our groups. And we're going to talk advocacy. So there's going to be 2 different advocacy groups that you can join. One room will be called activism/budget advocacy. The other room will be called legislative advocacy. You get to choose which one you want to join and talk about that advocacy. We also have a second Jamboard in which you can record your ideas. So this will be a chance for us to talk what we already started and get into those groups and start talking about ways to make change.
All right, so I see people are hopping in the groups. We've got legislative advocacy, activism, and budget advocacy. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Hey y'all, we still 39 strong and we've been through 2 breakout rooms. Wow, y'all are amazing. And let me turn my video on so you like, who that talking? Okay, y'all, we have gone through our recommendations. I know y'all talked about advocacy, activism, and I can share a little bit about my group. I'm gonna bring up my slides. Oh, we're actually coming to the end. Um, we, can you please share the advocacy? Yes. Can one of our facilitators drop the advocacy toolkit? So you have two things to look at right now. You have the advocacy toolkit, which will also be emailed out to you. So these are the ways that you can advocate for budget, for legislation. This is also a living document. We are going to edit it and add more to it and send it out for next week's, because guess what? We still have one more teach-in to go. We're going to be talking about facilities and services. And the most important part is your feedback. We need to know how you feel about these recommendations. We need to know any opinions, any feedback you want to give to the facilitators, so that way not only can WFP be clear in what our priorities need to be, but that also everyone, all the organizations here, can have an amazing next teach-in and inform our work for the rest of the year.